Hello, Dia. My name's Angelina Foster and I'm the artist in residence here in the Tan Yard in Ballytor. Earlier this year I received funding from the Bank of Ireland Business to Arts Fund, a COVID fund for artists, to investigate Ernest Shackleton's printmaking practices in Antarctica. But I also wanted to look at his family history, particularly the women, and how creativity had influenced his character. Because to me all of these things were connected, but I suppose I wasn't sure what I could get done in the time allocated. So I am just going to invite you in and show you some of the things I've been working on. Over the last year, Mary and Betsy Shackleton were born. It passes by the old mill founded by George Shackleton. You pass by the Quaker graveyard, and then you also pass by Mary Shackleton Leadbeater's house, which is now the museum and library. I suppose my studio here looks out upon Mary Shackleton Leadbeater's house, and at times I feel like she has been taunting me to resurrect her memory, because there was so much that has been forgotten about Mary. I kind of became fascinated with the correspondence and the letters between Mary Shackleton and Molly Bewley in particular, and all of the work they did in the anti-slavery campaigns. And I suppose letter writing in particular, letter writing on words, are something that seems to have been central to generations of Shackletons. So I decided early on that I would really have to almost park a lot of the research that I had found on the women in the Shackleton family history, because there was just so much of it that it was taking over everything that I was doing at the time. As an artist and a printmaker, I was totally blown away when I first found out that Shackleton brought a letterpress and an etching press to Antarctica in 1907 to craft the first book, Aurora Australis. This was the first book written, printed, illustrated and bound in Antarctica. The purpose of the production of the book was to occupy the minds of the crew over the long dark winter months, with most men contributing. All of the printing equipment was supplied by Sir Joseph Coston and Sons. They provided the small Albion letterpress and the etching press, 14-point Castellan old-face type, 220-gram Abbey Mills paper, some of which can still be seen in Antarctica today. In Heart of the Antarctic, Shackleton writes, "The early days of the printing department were not exactly happy, for the two amateur typesetters found themselves making many mistakes, and when they had at last set up a page, made all the necessary corrections, and printed off the necessary number of copies, they had to undertake the laborious work of ditting, that is, of distributing the type again. They plodded ahead steadily, however, and soon became more skillful, until at the end of a fortnight or 3 weeks, they could print 2 pages in a day. In just 3 weeks, they were rushed through courses in typesetting, the use of inks and dyes, design, cutting, acid baths and pulling prints." Bernard Day, the 22-year-old motor mechanic, with no known previous bookbinding experience, bound the book. 3 holes were punched in each page, and then all were sewn together with a green twine. Day used the packing cases from their food as the covers. The cases were made of Venista board, a lightweight strong board. Day had 2,500 packing cases to choose from. Many of the copies in public institutions today have become known by the stencil of their packing case on the inside cover, such as the Julian Soup copy or the Beans copy, held in the Alexander Turnbull Library in New Zealand. I've come to the National Print Museum of Ireland, who have 2 beautiful Albions.
and Mary Plunkett is going to demonstrate letterpress printing for us and show us how Joyce and Wilde might have printed the aorta.
So this is just a little bit about setting of the type. So here I have my leads. These are cut to a particular measure or line length, and these are placed into my composing stick here. So when they were deciding on their book, they might have decided on a particular width that they were going to use for their columns, and they would have then picked a lead to match that. So the stick is set to the measure, it's ready to go, and then we begin to set. And you set left to right, same as you would for reading or writing, but just each individual piece that you have has been cast backwards. And when you place it into the composing stick, you're placing it in upside down. And you're looking for this little piece here, which is called the nick. And you want the nick to be exposed, kind of so it sits on its back with the nick. And you just then when I go for a little space in between, where do I go for mid? I'm just setting a little bit of the same thing we were printing. The case is laid out kind of similarly to the same idea, should we say, as a QWERTY keyboard that we would use now, in that what you need most regularly, is here in the centre of the case. As this is the case for English, we have a lot more ease than other letters because we use that so much more frequently. This is the lower case, so traditionally there would have been two cases from which we get the term lowercase and uppercase. So this is the economy case, or also known as the California job case, and this includes everything that you need in one size and one style and one typeface. So Shackleton used Caslon, which is another serifed face. They used 14 point in their settings. So this, what I'm showing you here, is just a little bit bigger at a 24. So you would have continued setting to the end of the line. You'd then put in another lead and you'd continue filling up through your composing stick, and then you'd bring it to the stone and put together your form. So the letterpress uses an oil-based or rubber-based ink. It's very dense. And it'd be closest, in comparison, it'd be closest to lithography ink, would be the closest that it would be in regards to any other kind of printmaking techniques.
So maybe they use the same ink.
That's one thing that occurs to me, that if they were away like that and trying to reduce the amount of things they were taking, they might have well used the same ink for their lithography as for their letterpress. Might have. But you'll see it's the density of it. You'll see it's very dense ink, and just getting a lovely even coverage there now.
Okay.
So this is the Albion printing press. It was developed in about 1820 by Richard Whittaker Cope, and this was the sort of press that Shackleton had in the Antarctic. This was a development from the big press that you see behind me, which was the Columbian, made earlier in that century. But as you can see, this press was a bit smaller, more compact, and they were able to bring it to the Antarctic, which is amazing. So it's a flat bed. We raised this up now, this tin pan. There would have been a frisket here to hold our paper. Here is the bed of our press, and this is where we place our type. This is our form, all locked up with the various elements that come together to make up our setting. We have our pieces of type. In between this are leads, which are the lines which separate out the lines of type themselves. You're giving you your leading. Around that is furniture, which are larger cast pieces which support the type on all sides. And then you have these little pieces here, which are the coins, which are expanded by a coin key, and they just lock it all up so that you can lift it and move it around. It's held in a chase, and when it's all together, it is known as the form. So we'll ink up now. So we put on our piece of paper now. Again, this would have been held in the timpan there, held by a frisket and timpan. We place this down. We put it underneath the platen. So we have our bed, we have our platen here, and now I pull this across to make the impression and take a print.
This is Antarctic Days by James Murray and George Marston. In it, they write, the temperature varies. It is too cold to keep the printer's ink fluid. It gets sticky and freezes. To cope with this, a candle was set burning underneath the plate on which the ink was. This was all right, but it made the ink too fluid, and the temperature had to be regulated by moving the candle about. Once the printers were called away while the candle was burning, and nobody happened to notice it. When they returned, they found the plate had overheated and had melted the inking roller of gelatine substance. I believe it was the only one on the continent and had to be recast somehow. While I acknowledge Joyce and Wilde had a huge task in composing and printing the text for Aora, especially with only 3 weeks training, I feel the work of George Marston and the challenges he faced have been underestimated. I think Shackleton must have put considerable time into how he would print in Antarctica during his 3 years of planning the expedition, possibly getting advice from his sister's artistic network. He had a printer's device or a printer's mark made of 2 penguins, which has become symbolic and a defining feature of the book. He brought 2 printmaking processes to Antarctica, etching and allography. He probably brought 2 techniques in case either one did not suit the Antarctic conditions. Today I'd like to focus on the lithography and demonstrate how I think George produced the lithographs by reconstructing one of the prints from the Aora, the Messman, which is also one of my favourite stories in the book. Lithography, as in stone lithography, was invented in Bavaria in 1798. The use of aluminium plates in lithography was developed in the 1890s. Allography, or aluminium plate lithography, was a relatively new process for Shackleton to bring to Antarctica. While aluminium was also used for the etchings, the aluminium plates for the allography would have been pre-treated before leaving England. They would have been treated in a ball graining machine to give them a similar surface to stone to work on. I'm just filing the edges of the plates here so that they don't catch in the blankets of the etching press. So next I need to clean the plates, which is also called counter etch. I'm using a mix of caustic soda, as a number of people have mentioned to me that was used in Antarctica. The plate gets quite hot, it has quite a heated sensation, which I'm sure would have been quite nice for them in Antarctica. So these are my materials for drawing on plate or stone for lithography. So I have my touches and I have my crayons, or they're sometimes called chalk, lithography chalk. They come in different grades of softness, 5 being the hardest and 1 being the softest. So these crayons have a very high grease content. Lithography works on the principle that water and grease repel each other. To make a lithograph, the artist first draws the illustration on paper. They then copy the image in reverse onto an aluminium plate. The plates are extremely sensitive to grease, even the oil on your hands, which is why I have a sheet of paper over my drawing, and I will work my way down the drawing with the sheet of paper to make sure that my hands don't come in contact with the plate. After I finish the drawing, I coat the borders in gum arabic. So now I'm ready for my first etch. So this is what I'll be using to do the first etch. My etch solution then is made up of pure gum arabic and 3 3 to 4 drops of phosphoric acid. So first I'll be adding the talc. The talc helps protect the drawing from the acids, while also helping the image to bond to the plate, and it locks the grease in place. I then add pure gum arabic to the borders initially, and then to the drawing, and rub it in. I then add the first of my etch solution, which is the phosphoric acid mixed with gum arabic, and I repeat this process about 3 times, which takes about 6 minutes altogether. I then remove the excess etch solution with the cheesecloth, and then I use the other 2 pieces of cheesecloth to buff down the plate. I then use the law principle. So first I wipe the drawing from the plate with lithophene. I then add a layer of asphaltum and lightly buff it with a cheesecloth. Asphaltum makes the plate more ink receptive. So I leave the asphaltum for about 5 minutes or so to dry, and while that's drying I can get my ink ready. So I sponge off the asphaltum and the excess gum arabic with water. So I then start to ink up the plate, sponging with a thin layer of water occasionally. The lithography ink also has a high grease content, and grease is attracted to grease, so the ink should only take to the parts of the etching whereby the grease has been laid down. I then let the ink dry, and then I start my second etch. So the second etch is a repeat of the first etch, but when I ink up, I can then start to print my proofs and then start my additions. Each colour requires a plate, so that beautiful title page of the Aurora Australis would have been a 2-plate print. The inevitable state of such a hut after doing all possible for cleanliness can be imagined. 15 men shut up together, say during a blizzard which lasts a week. Nobody goes out unless on business. Everyone who goes out brings in snow under feet and clothes. Sea blubber is burned mixed with coal for economy. The blubber melts and runs out on the floor. The ordinary unsweepable soil of the place is a rich compost of all filth, cemented with blubber, more nearly resembling the soil of a whaling station than anything else I know. So much for the ordinary printing. The lithography was still worse. All the evils enumerated above persecuted the lithographer, and he had others all to himself. The more delicate part of his work could not be done when the hut was in full activity, with vibration, noise and settling smuts. So Marston used to do most of his printing in the early hours of the morning, when the hut was as nearly quiet and free from vibration as it ever became, and there was a minimum of dust, at least in suspension in the air. So I printed this edition on handmade Japanese paper, abogami paper. And so this is my interpretation of The Mess Man. A number of people have asked how I first became interested in Ernest Shackleton. So Shackleton grabbed my attention first, I suppose, when I was on an adventure of my own in 2005. I was on my working holiday in New Zealand, backpacking and following the Lions tour. I found a job in Auckland, and like most people in a new city, I visited the sites and the museums and the galleries before I got to know people. And I remember one day I was really homesick and I walked into the Maritime Museum in Auckland, and there was a huge exhibition on about Shackleton and Antarctic explorers. So here was this man who was born close to where I was from in Ireland, who had done these amazing things and was held in the highest regard by New Zealanders who I spoke to about it. By the time this film airs, I'll be halfway through my artisan school residency in Kilkee Primary School, which is close to where Shackleton was born, where we will be, where the kids will be learning hands-on polar printing with my mobile letterpress and etching press. I hope you've enjoyed my film and my interpretation of how the crew printed Aurora Australis. I've had so many people give me advice and direction over the last year, some of whom I hope I'm going to collaborate with in the future. I'd like to give the Shackleton Museum, especially Margaret, Sinead and Seamus, a huge thank you for making this possible.
Hi folks, my name's Alan Noak and I'm project leader for the Request 2021 Antarctica project. Our project has 10 objectives, and one of those objectives, number 8, is to celebrate and pay respects to the achievements of Sir Ernest Shackleton. Quite early on in the project, we were thrilled when the Honourable Alexandra Shackleton agreed to be our primary project patron. We even have our Shackleton the Penguin mascot. Top left here, you can see him at a graduation ceremony in Hong Kong. We get photos from him all over the world. And down there, you can see him wearing Frank Wilde's goggles. As part of our project fundraising back in April this year, we actually got to have 2 rowing machines either side of the James Caird lifeboat. And over the 17 days, we rowed the equivalent of 800 nautical miles, the same as they rowed from Elephant Island to South Georgia. And lastly, I want to mention our Shackleton Scout Zone ceremony. This is when the team held it at St. Catherine Docks. And other scouts along the original quest route are holding the ceremony. So this is a group of scouts in Lisbon who held the ceremony for us. And it's then going on to Madeira, Rio de Janeiro, and we've got scouts all along the original quest route holding the ceremony. And we're going to try and get as many scouts as we can holding it on the 5th of January 2022 all around the world. So that's it from me. I hope you have a fantastic day at Virtually Shackleton, and I just want to wish you all the very best from the Request 2021 team.